We're set up here to work with an Angular app that works along with a backend server for authentication and authorization using JSON Web Tokens. What we want to look at is how we can send an authenticated request to the backend server to access a resource by making sure to construct the request properly from our front-end Angular app. First things first, let's take a look at what's going on with interacting with the backend server independent of our Angular app. So there's a resource here, localhost port 3456/cars. I'll tell you that resource is protected, so you do need to provide a valid authorization token to get access to it. And in fact, if I go ahead and attempt to send the request to that endpoint, you can see my result here is that authorization is not provided. Now, if I attempt to send this same HTTP request, adding an authorization header that has a valid JSON Web Token associated with it, when I now send this request, you can see I'm actually going to be able to get back the value, the result from that backend resource. I'll also show you here that in order to actually log in and get a valid authentication or authorization token, I can use another endpoint here, which is localhost port 3456/login. When I use it, I'm going to have to pass a valid username and a password. And when I do so, I'm going to get back an access token that we can then use in our headers to make sure we can access restricted resources. So that said, back over in our editor, what we want to look at is making sure that require authorization coming from Angular have a valid authorization token attached so that they can be successful. To do that, we'll be using the Angular 2 JWT helper library, which makes it easier for us to work with JSON Web Tokens originating from a front-end Angular app. With Angular 2 JWT already installed in our app, you can see here on screen, we've created a module auth.module.ts where we're returning our factory function auth HTTP service factory that is basically configuring how our authenticated requests should be made. Basically, we're saying that whenever we use the auth HTTP service, instead of Angular's HTTP service, to send an HTTP request, we want to first check our local storage for a token named app auth token, and we want to attach that as an authorization header to the outgoing request. So the auth HTTP service here is a stand-in replacement for Angular's own HTTP service, and we can use it to make requests to servers, the main difference being that behind the scenes, based on our configuration, we're going to get this automatic addition of authorization tokens if they are available in the browser storage. Now, I will mention that if you did not need to provide a custom configuration, you could just pass in an instance of auth-config as is without doing anything else. But I know that my Angular application here has been set up so that when a user logs in and the backend server passes back a valid access token, the Angular app, as it is right now, is storing that token in the browser's local storage with a name app_auth_token, which is not the default name that auth-config would look for, which is why here it's become necessary for me to provide my own custom auth-config object when configuring my auth HTTP service. If you did not have a need for any customizations, again, you could go with auth-config as is. So now that we know what our auth HTTP setup looks like, let's go to another component in this application, which is our admin component. Now, this component I'll show you is already front-end protected from activation via a guard here, user guard, which itself checks to make sure that a valid authentication is stored in the browser's local storage. So from a front-end perspective, being able to navigate to this component already requires a certain level of access. But if we take a look inside the component itself, you can see that when it's initialized, we're calling a function here, getCars, and getCars is going to make an HTTP call to our restricted backend endpoint. You remember that's going to be /cars, and you remember in order to actually get back a result from this endpoint, there has to be a valid authorization header going along with this request to the server. Leaving things as they are, let's quickly jump over to our running application. Once it loads up, I'll mention that right now we're not logged in, so there is no type of access token stored anywhere in this browser instance's storage. And if I attempt to go to the home page, that works fine. If I attempt to go to the admin page, however, you can see down in my console that navigation is being denied So I can use my login component here to provide a valid username and password. And if I log in, now I get a valid access token. At this point, it's now also stored in the browser storage. So now if I attempt to go to my admin section, I'm going to get there. But while you see us being able to access most of the template here, if we take a look down in the console again, you can see where the call for the cars resource from our server is coming back as authorization not provided. Again, this is because we're making an HTTP request to our backend server, but there's no authorization token attached to said request. Jumping back over to our editor, that is an easy fix because if you remember, we did set up our own auth HTTP, which we can now simply use in place of Angular's HTTP service. And just by this simple change alone, and also knowing that over in our application, once the user is logged in, a valid access token is going to be stored in the browser that auth HTTP is going to be able to reach out, grab, and then attach to my request. If we save things now and go back over to our browser, you'll notice that when this exact same route /admin loads up, this time, because our call is being made with auth HTTP, and because there is that access token available, it is being attached to our outgoing request, causing it to be authorized and causing us to actually get back our list of cars, the restricted endpoint from our server.